Well, good morning and welcome to the webinar from Solar and Energy Action Committee, Expedited PV Permitting Process Guidelines for Small Residential Solar Energy Systems. Wow, that's a long name. My name is Hector Bordas. I'm the head of Building and Safety for the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Works. We provide building and safety services for the county unincorporated area in 16 cities. And I'll be your host for the day. So welcome everybody. As we go through the introductions, you'll probably see a poll. It's a one-question poll. We would really greatly appreciate it if you just answer that real quickly. And today's webinar, we have two great speakers. Pete Jackson, who's the Chief Electrical Inspector for the City of Bakersfield, and John Tacker, he's a Senior Regulatory Engineer for Underwriters Laboratory. And they'll say a few more words about themselves once we kick this off. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Solar and Energy Action Committee, I'm going to provide a real brief overview on what it is. And those of you that are familiar, welcome back. And we're glad that you are here. The Solar Energy Action Committee was established and is facilitated by the County of Los Angeles. And why did we do that? Well, as the county serves such a large population for the unincorporated areas, but 16 cities, roughly around 2 million residents. And solar is growing tremendously in these areas. And we are facing a lot of challenges, a lot of questions kept coming up. How do we do this? How do we address the new technology, evolving regulations? What are the issues with testing of products? How do you address fire issues? How do you address many different types of issues? And lots of questions, lots of challenges. And so we said, hey, why don't we bring in experts in the industry, people that are highly knowledgeable that can help us solve these problems, these challenges, and answer these questions. And then take these answers and write them up as recommendations and informational bulletins and make them available to anybody in the industry. And in the industry, I mean the public sector and the private sector, in the hopes that people will take these and implement them and help them move solar along much quicker and help folks like ourselves solve a lot of the problems so we don't have to recreate the issues. So, and who are the people in this committee? Our committee is made up of 24 members, and there's installers, cities, counties, manufacturers, people representing fire, people representing the testing labs. So it's a great mix of folks. These are folks throughout the state of California. They're well known in the industry and they bring a wealth of knowledge. So what are some of the things that we're looking at? Well, we just spent some time looking at AB 2188, and if you go to our website, you'll see some documents published regarding AB 2188 that helps address some of the regulatory challenges and how to make things smoother for everybody. We have worked with utilities on interconnection issues and published 4 documents on interconnections that I think were very valuable for installers, but also for jurisdictions that see some of the challenges with interconnections. We are also working on informational bulletin on UL 2703, and you'll hear Pete and John talk about that real soon. And also working on a manual guidelines for utility-scale solar installations, ground-mounted systems, to help those developers and contractors and owners who want to do business in Los Angeles County. And hopefully this manual will help others besides LA County how to bring solar in the area and how to do that smoother, a lot quicker, within budget, and help meet a lot of goals. So how does this work? Well, the committee, they are breaking down barriers, communication barriers, and they work very hard at collaboration. We have some awesome discussions, sometimes conflicting discussions, but always positive with a specific goal in mind, is to address very specific issues. And I encourage you to either attend in person the meetings or join us online. There's tremendous value in hearing the discussions because you get to learn from different perspectives. So today we're going to do something a little different in this webinar. It's not going to be so formal. are going to try to recreate what typically happens at one of our meetings. And we have two people that they're very good friends, but they're going to do their best at having those types of discussions as we walk you through several of the recommendations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete Jackson and John Tacker for the rest of this webinar. And feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer them. And I welcome you again. So Pete and John, you're on.
Thank you, Hector. This is Pete Jackson, and I am the electrical inspector for the city of Bakersfield. For those of you that may not be familiar with the city, it's a city of about 400,000 residents in the southern part of the Central Valley of California, and a very busy one for PV installation. I want to encourage all the attendees today to feel free to submit questions. We want this to be a conversation, and we want to make sure that we're able to address your comments, your concerns regarding the subject. Just the sheer number of PV installations that we're all seeing, combined with the rapidly changing technology and codes and standards, makes this a challenging environment, but there's definitely ways to handle those challenges, and that's what we'll talk about today. John?
Yeah, and Pete, just one more thing. How many installations do you have to permit on a regular basis in Bakersfield?
We see between 150 and 200 residential PV permits per week, and another half dozen to a dozen commercial installations per week. And we've seen that rate for the last year or two, actually last couple of years. So it's been quite busy, and it's staying that way.
I felt it was important to bring that point forward simply because of the conversation we're going to have is about how to facilitate a submission of the uniform, correct, and complete expedited PD permitting applications, which is something you do on quite a regular basis there. For me,
and
yes, go.
Sorry. I was going to say, you brought up a good point in that this isn't something that's just a benefit for the applicant, but it's necessary for the jurisdiction as well. When you're looking at these kinds of numbers, you've got to make sure that you're fulfilling your responsibilities in an effective and an efficient manner, and it's key to the success.
As for me, I've been involved with codes development and regulations for over 30 years at UL, and I regularly provide training. Sometimes I have the pleasure of providing training classes with Pete to assist all of the stakeholders, whether they be manufacturers, installers, designers, AHJs. And when we say AHJs, by the way, I just want to make clear for those who may not catch that term, that means authorities having jurisdiction. That means people like Pete, the people that are going to actually issue the permits and inspect the installations. I'm involved in all the codes: electrical, building, fire, mechanical, plumbing, energy conservation. So I get an opportunity to see the new codes as they develop, to actually get my hands involved in it, as well as get involved with new technologies. And that's also an important aspect to be aware of, because, as Pete noted, is there's always somebody coming up with a better mousetrap, so to speak, something that's going to work better, or a new twist on what we have, and that those changes, if you're not keeping up on that, which we'll talk about later, how to keep up on it. If you're not aware of what's going on a regular basis, it may cause some confusion during that permitting process, because you look at something and go, gee, I've never seen that before, what do I do? And so we'll talk about how you might address those issues.
Education and communication are absolutely critical to this process, and that's really what this event today is about. But we're gonna help you out and point to some other avenues and some other ways to help facilitate that communication. Easier, faster, more accurate PV permitting is the goal, and communication is a key component of that. We will be talking about the Assembly Bill 2188 requirements and the standard plan today, but I also want to just mention, at the end, 3 or 4 specific items that I see personally on every day here with those 200 permits on processing. Here's 3 or 4 big items that slows down the process. And I want to be able to communicate that so that we can help and eliminate some of those roadblocks.
And I think it's invaluable that we're having these discussions, such as today, as well as the SEAC meetings, as well as in other venues, because it is important, I think, for all of us to understand and appreciate that these issues are on both sides of the counter, of the permit counter, whether you are involved with issuing the permits, reviewing and issuing the permits, or you're the one creating the design that you want to have permitted and installing the system. And that helps if we all know where everybody is coming from, why the requirements are the way they are, and can prepare for them. It helps to reduce the confusion. It helps to remove any unnecessary complexity or make things clear. And as a result, then all of us can do our jobs and do them efficiently and in reasonable time.
And I think looking at the screen, number 1, the issue statement, we've pretty well covered that. Those misunderstandings, that miscommunication, the lack of maybe knowledge or education on the most current requirements, it's all very challenging, but that's the source of the confusion. I think you had a comment on that, John?
No, I'm going along for the ride here too.
But something else, number 2, the background, the first line there, permitting processes can vary widely across jurisdictions. And that's true, and that's definitely part of the challenge for everybody, understandably. I know that's why AB 2188 came into existence, and to the degree that everyone can be on the same page, that's a benefit. And it's not just a benefit it's an extreme benefit for the applicant, but also for all the jurisdictions in California, because the more uniform things can become, the easier it is for all of us, so that the submittal requirements and what's submitted for permit is accurate to your needs the first time it comes in. And getting to that, number 3 there, current status. As of September 30th, 2015, all California jurisdictions were required to have an ordinance in accordance with Assembly Bill 2188. And the idea of it is a streamlined process and a more uniform process. The devil's always in the details. If you read the text of the law, it says the expedited process must substantially conform to the checklist and standard plans of the California Solar Permitting Guidebook. And before this event today, I contacted 12 attorneys to get an opinion on what substantial conformance is, and I got 13 opinions. So there's some wiggle room there. And the purpose of that is because this is a unique animal. This is the first time that a legislature of a state in California has more or less legislated some technical requirements that are normally left to local jurisdictions. So wisely, there's some wiggle room there, because I do recognize that this is a technical subject and there's a wide variety of installations and permitting processes. And it's a goal. We want to standardize it. We want to expedite it. We want it to make it clean and simple. But we have to recognize that there's going to be differences on how that's carried out.
And Pete, I think it's important to also note that while the goal would be to expedite any PV installation, there's actually a limitation as to, or I shouldn't say limitation per se, but there is a type of PV systems that are under AB 2188, and then there are those installations that are not.
Yes, key point. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Defining the box where which type of installation, based on how it's connected, the size, and a few other factors, is required to be covered under this law. But it's not all installations for good reasons. So we have to have some knowledge and some understanding of that process. What are the elements of an expedited process? There's 5 major ones that are pointed out in the guidebook, and what should a jurisdiction do to help promote this? And when I say expedited process and expedited permit, remember, this isn't all about just making it faster and quicker. It has to be accurate as well. There is a point to a permit. We have to remember that both for the AHJ and for the installer, it's not our residence. It's not our roof. It belongs to an owner, and we're just trying to make sure the installation is correct and effective. There's other stakeholders. There's insurers that insure that roof. So it's not just a matter of getting it done quickly. It's getting it done quickly and correctly. But what would those elements be? AB 2188 says, go ahead.
Before we go on, there was a question here regarding the permits. It's interesting that I just saw on the screen. Do you know how many permits are submitted by the homeowner or the small business owner compared to a professional installer, say, in the past year? And how does the renting or versus owning the panels factor in?
That's an extremely good question, and it actually comes back to one of my points that slows things down in my jurisdiction. I couldn't quantify it in terms of numbers, but the vast majority of permits are taken out by an installer, not the homeowner. And one thing that has slowed things down here is that many times these permits are being taken out without the owner's knowledge. And so we'll end up with 1, 2, 3, or 4 permits for an address that the owner wasn't aware of. And so I think what's happening possibly is he's talking to various companies about the systems, and they're pulling permits a little ahead of time. And that is something that's slowing things down.
But on the flip side, you want to make sure that whoever is pulling the permit is actually providing all the appropriate information. And I would think that not every homeowner is going to be well versed in all that is needed for obtaining that permit. Of course, those of us who are the weekend warriors, maybe we might know a little bit more. But again, I would think are you looking for those permits to be pulled only by a professional installer or a qualified person as the electrical code defines, or is it that you're okay with the homeowner pulling the permit for PV?
Yeah, the homeowner can certainly pull a permit for his own residence under the owner-builder clause, and that's one of the reasons for AB 2188, the standardized plan, was to have a format for those that may not do this every day to start with, something they can submit to the jurisdiction and have a complete package without having to hire a professional engineer or something. So we do, to quantify those, I would say it's less than 10%, probably less than 5% are owner builders, but we definitely see those. We enjoy working with them. We are able to spend a little more time with them because the professionals, they know what they're doing. They have a process in place, and there may be errors along the way, but in essence, they're doing hundreds of these on a regular basis. So they pretty much got it together. But the homeowners, sometimes they want to do it right, but they don't. If they don't do this for a living or don't have experience in the process, they need some help. And that's one thing that AB 2188 definitely can help.
And also in regards to AB 2188, does renting or owning make any difference? I don't think it does. I don't think it makes any distinction.
No, there's no distinction there from our perspective. Who owns the system? It's whose property is it being installed on is what governs the permit. Whether it's a lease, a rent, or an own doesn't have any bearing on the code requirements that are in effect. So looking at number 4, just on our page there, key considerations. Why is this so important? And a lot of it comes from the goals. that the state of California has set for renewable energy sources, and solar PV has certainly turned out to be a major component for reaching that goal. And it's been very successful to date, but there's a lot of room for growth, so it's going to keep going. And part of this process was to have something in place that facilitates that rapid adoption of the PV. That first bullet point, again, you see the word there, AB 2188 requires all California jurisdictions to adopt an ordinance to create a streamlined permitting process in substantial conformance. So again, a lot of times when I talk to various jurisdictions, some of them have a lot of heartburn because they'll see things in there, they'll hear things and they'll say, well, you know, my jurisdiction is small, we just can't do this or we just can't do that. That's recognized. It's not meant to be an excuse to not meet the requirements or meet the goals, but substantial conformance means do the best you can for your own benefit as well as the applicant.
And I think it's important to note that that solar permitting guidebook, though, is not something that was drawn up by one or two people. It was drawn together by several stakeholders, including both of us. Pete and I have been involved in numerous phone calls and conference calls to hone the specific requirements in there to make sure that they are understandable, they're clear, we worked very hard to remove any ambiguity, as well as to make sure we did not include anything in the guidebook that was more than what the codes that are adopted by the state would require. Of course, certainly a local jurisdiction may have amended their the code to be more restrictive in their jurisdiction and may have to adjust the guidebook in a certain way, but I would suggest that's probably very far and few between on those amendments in regards to PV installations.
Yeah, I see a couple of questions up there, but I want to, since you brought up the subject, I want to maybe just give a brief history of how this guidebook came to be. The effort actually started back in 2011 at the request of the Governor's Office. The Center for Sustainable Energy convened a group of stakeholders, which included designers, installers, HJs, manufacturers, nationally recognized testing labs such as UL, and to produce a standardized plan and group of checklists to promote statewide consistency of permitting and inspection of PV systems. And the goal was to have something that met 80% of installations. Let's get something out there that covers 80% of what's being installed. And so what that turned out to be was a group of a dozen or so of us that met for 2 to 3 hours every Monday or Tuesday for 6 months and hammering this out. If you look, and I would like to give everyone's name that was part of the process, but I'm afraid I'll leave someone out. But if you look on page 5 of the guidebook, you'll see all the names of those that helped produce the overall book. But it was about 14 or so, a group that actually worked on the standard plan. The first edition was published in June 2012. We're now on the second edition, which was updated in 2014, and John and I, along with another half-dozen individuals, are working on an update to cover the requirements as they change for the 2016 California Electrical Code, which will soon be adopted. And this all started before AB 2188, but when AB 2188 became law last year, it was recognized that this guidebook and the standard plan would be something already in place that could be implemented to serve the purposes of that law.
And I think it's also important that when we do make any changes to that guidebook, we are unanimous in our agreement that that's the change we're going to go with. If we do not go on to another subject until we made sure that we're all in agreement with it. May not be perfect, or you know, and there's always room for improvement. And so we don't get the perfection is not. What is it, Pete? The perfection is not the enemy of the good. But we do we don't we take very seriously how we put that in. I think it would be probably good for us to, there was a question about what is the thinking about expediting the fixed tilt residential ground-mounted systems and other non-roof mounted systems. And I think that, frankly, we started off with, as you noted, Pete, earlier, that we went for about 80% of the, or so. You can argue about what that, whether it's 82% or 79% or what gradient there is, but we were trying to go after the typical, and maybe in time as we go along, we'd expand the solar guidebook to address also the ground mount at some point. The tilt and such may have issues, not necessarily with electrical, but may have there may be some other considerations that have to be taken care of in regards to structural, because that structural plan check is, it's not just a plan check of electrical. There's also fire requirements and structural requirements that have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and from a higher level point of view on that, the AB 2188 law and the standard plan that was developed to support it does not include specifically ground mount arrays. Now, and so jurisdiction, does not have to process those under that law. The information is not there to do so on the standard plan. Having said that, there's nothing that says you can't use the principles to expedite any permit, whether it fits within the box that defines AB 2188 systems or not. The ideas of having a standard checklist, of having things located online, of using a standard format, of reviewing the permit application, within a 1 to 3 day time frame. There's nothing that says you can't shoot for those goals for any system. So ground mount systems, although they don't, in my jurisdiction, they don't come under our AB 2188 process, we still expedite the review and inspection in the same way. Obviously, it may not be a single inspection because we may have footings that we have to inspect, things like that, and that's why it's not covered under the law. But that doesn't mean that all the principles and goals of an expedited system go out the window. The challenge with coming up with a standard plan was to create a simple fill-in-the-blank plan that covers 80% of installations. And what makes it an additional challenge is that a group of 10 to 14 individuals were from different perspectives. And you've heard the old saying that a camel is a horse created by a committee, and that's what you have to work with. So it was a very long, tedious process. The result may be something that not, it covers all the bases, it covers all the concerns of those that were involved in the process from different perspectives. It doesn't mean it's the cleanest way to do it, and jurisdictions can certainly modify the standard plan and the guidebook if they so deem, or come up with their own process that meets the goals. I think our first go-around, the first expedited plan we came up with was 27 pages long, which was much longer than most unexpedited processes, but it was more of an explanatory, long version to explain all the requirements and work somebody through it if they had no knowledge of it. But after that, we were asked to come back and say, can't you shorten this up for those, those installers that know this stuff pretty well and have already had the training and just need a format for the plan and for the permit. So I think we got it down to 11 pages or so.
It's been a process.
Yeah, trying to strike a balance, to have a simple yet comprehensive vehicle that covers as many conditions as possible is not easy, and then get consensus by all the stakeholders. So,
and the guidebook is, as we've talked a lot about too, Pete, you and I had this conversation quite often about the guidebook is a set of checklists and simplified standard plan. It's not a training manual. It's not something that it's going to be expecting that you have some degree of knowledge about the code requirements, that you're going to have some degree of knowledge about installation practices.
Yeah, that's correct. What can you do to expedite the process? What does AB 2188 say you have to do? I mean, the question about the ground mount system is excellent because it doesn't fit in the box. And what does AB 2188 do? It defines a box, and it says for those systems within this box, you have to have a process, an expedited process available. So what is that box? It's a roof-mounted system on a single or duplex family dwelling, 10 kW or less, utility interactive, for a dwelling or a home that does not exceed maximum legal building heights. It's a load side connection only, no supply side permitted under this process. No downsizing of the main circuit breaker, main disconnect, no service upgrade, and structural conformance to the toolkit number 5 in the guidebook. So by the law, your process only has to be in place for those systems that fit within this box. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use those goals to achieve those goals with other systems. I think one of the main ones is just these 5 bullet points. What are the elements of an expedited process? So for those systems that comply, or even for those that don't, what can a jurisdiction do to expedite the process? And one of them is a checklist of all your requirements, available on a web site if available, detailing exactly what you expect to be turned in so somebody knows before they start, what do I need to provide you so that you can approve this permit. Electronic submission, if available, if possible, for the jurisdiction is required. And electronic submission is defined as via email, internet, or even a fax machine. So if you have those tools available, it's just saying make use of them. A single final inspection is one of the goals, and a worthy one. Over the years there's been jurisdictions that maybe have fire and planning and a couple of different building inspections for a final inspection of a simple residential PV system. And the goal was, do we really need that? Can we get away from that? Can a single inspector go out there and look at all of that? That's a worthy goal. 2 more points, a maximum of 1 to 3 days for review of a PV plan. That's what the law says. Some jurisdictions can do much better than that. Some have online capability. Some can do it over the counter. But worst case, the law says within 3 days. And the last goal is a standardized submittal or plan format. Have that available for them. In some cases, I would rather see the submitter use their own format for submission of plans rather than the standardized ones in the guidebook. We would accept either, but if you're going to come in under the AB 2188 process, you have to have a standard one available, and that's why we produced it for the guidebook.
But wouldn't that depend, Pete, on whether you're in your jurisdiction? I believe you're seeing all the plans, whereas in another jurisdiction, they might not have as often plans coming through. They may be relying on someone who to review that may not have the depth of understanding that you have about PV.
Well, that's correct. There's a wide variety of jurisdictions in California, and that includes both their size and the scope. For instance, Hector, who spoke to us earlier, that's the largest jurisdiction in the state, the County of Los Angeles, and they have quite an infrastructure to support the PV submittal process and approval. Mine's a bit smaller, but yet we have dedicated plan review staff. But there's other jurisdictions where the inspector in the field may also be performing the plan review at the same time. So that needs to be recognized, and you have to have a system that facilitates performance regardless of the scale or the scope of the jurisdiction.
So Pete, there's an interesting question that's raised by someone here about how are you handling the one inspection aspect when mounting, flashing, and bonding of rails are completed, completely covered once the panels are installed. We've had this discussion and actually under another item of the SEAC issue where we were talking about this and coming up with potential ways that could be addressed. I know that you have a particular way you address it. Other jurisdictions may say, I will accept photos, but it really depends upon each jurisdiction about how they are going to accomplish that single inspection. Correct?
That's correct, and that's a great question because that is one of the most challenging elements of this process from our perspective here. To get down to some of the the nitty-gritty with it, if we're going to look at a system that's been installed on a comp roof, there's no real requirement for us to see the flashing or sealing of that roof at that point. We can see it at final inspection. Where it gets more difficult is where the roof is a tile roof, because there are underlayment requirements to maintain the warranty of the roof. And so, the question is, how do you see that underlayment? When you sign off the project and you approve it as a jurisdiction, you're saying to the owner of that dwelling that your roof has been sealed in conformance with the code and product standards. And if you haven't seen it, how can you say that? So, there's different ways that can be facilitated. I think some jurisdictions will rely on photos for some type of due diligence that they've inspected that portion of the installation, and that could apply also to the connection to the rafters. Others may say, well, on a tile roof, can you remove 2 or 3 of the tiles at final inspection so that we can see that you flashed or sealed it in accordance with your design, with the way you told us you were going to do it. And the choice of how an installer or a designer chooses to flash or seal that connection has a big impact on this. Remember, our responsibility is to look the homeowner in the eye and say, yes, it was installed correctly according to the design that was submitted to us. So whatever has been used to make that connection will dictate the level of inspection. But it can be facilitated under single inspection. It doesn't always make it easy. We still have installers that prefer a 2 inspection process for those tile roofs because they just assume that we came by and looked at it while they're installing those connections and sign it off then and not have to try to look at it after the fact. But there's room in that within the law. So we can do it in a single inspection. Keep in mind, the jurisdiction is not bound by the AB 2188 law for a system that's not that hasn't been brought through the AB 2188 process, the expedited process as put together by a jurisdiction. And that's something I want to touch upon. 2 responsibilities there. By law, the jurisdictions have to adopt an AB 2188 compliant process, and they had to do it as of September 30th, 2015. But the applicant has a responsibility too. He has to use that system, and he has to ask to use it. You have to keep in mind that not all systems will fit in the box for AB 2188 requirements, so a jurisdiction will have a non-expedited process too, for lack of a better word. So which process do you want to use as the applicant? You have a responsibility to know, what the law says, which ones are eligible, and you have to ask to use it. Otherwise, communication is key. And if you don't ask to use it, it may be there, it may be available, but if you want to use it, make sure you're making use of it, make sure you're talking to the right people at the jurisdiction.
So you can see that this is one of those areas that was, in our discussions, was really discussed to quite an extent at SEAC. And by the way, you're getting, for those of you who are on here, you're getting a bonus because we were talking about our issue 3, which is expedited PV permitting process guidelines, and we dipped into actually talking about our issue 1, single inspection guidelines, and covers a lot of what Pete was talking about there. If you go to SEAC website, which is www.seacgroup.org, and you go under our work, you'll see the first one is regarding that single inspection. And for those of you who want to get more guidance on that particular area and some recommendations, you will find it there. But yeah, I think so. If we go back to the recommendations on the issue 3, I think it's one of those things where sometimes I think we get on the recommendation 1 of using the checklist and so forth. We do need to and standard plan. We do need to remember that it's not. It's electrical as well as there's a plan for and guidance on the structural as well as there is for fire classification. So all 3 have to be met. And Pete, each jurisdiction will post on their website. That's required by AB 2188 in item 1, is it not? Recommendation 1 for each jurisdiction to post it. So it's already, that information is posted on a website, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it does have to be posted. And again, make sure that if you're the applicant, you're looking for that. You're viewing it. And if you don't see it, ask someone. And make sure you ask the right person with the jurisdiction that can point you in the right direction. But yes, that is required. And I'm all in favor of that. I'm in favor of letting people know up front what's expected. Especially for field inspection. I spent most of my career on the installer end of things, and as the installer, I always wanted to know what's going to be expected, what will they be looking for at final inspection. I'd rather know up front, and that's the idea of that recommendation, and it's a good one.
So Pete, you were saying that the guidebook is designed for systems that are single load, no service upgrade. Or did I misunderstand what you were saying?
Yeah, I see the question there. I think which ones are? I think the question is in regard to specifics of what fits in the box for AB 2188. What's eligible?
Right. That's right.
Yeah. 10 kW or less. I'll stick to the electrical. It sounds like that was an electrical question. 10 kW or less, load side connection, meaning on the load side of the main service disconnect. So it doesn't cover systems that would be connected on the line side or supply side ahead of the main disconnect. No systems that where the main circuit breaker is being derated to allow larger PV systems. Those aren't covered under the AB 2188 process, or those that require a service upgrade. None of those are covered under the process as the law is written. It doesn't mean the jurisdiction couldn't recognize those. It's just saying that that's not required, and the guidebook and the standard plan does not have a format for those particular elements.
And Pete, there's also that interesting question about, is it lawful for a city to demand a structural engineer's inspection for a rough racking? And I'm not an attorney, but I would think that there's a building official needs to determine what needs to be done. If there is a cause for that, wouldn't that be the case? Maybe even since that's an administrative question as well, maybe Hector might even want to weigh in on that one.
Well, yeah, I'm not an attorney nor am I a structural engineer, but I think the key point is that you brought up is what's the reason for that requirement? So a city or a jurisdiction should be able to answer the question as to why you're asking for what you're asking. And in my jurisdiction, I'm more than happy to do that. In fact, we don't want to ask for anything that we don't need to ask for. So that would be the key question. If that's being asked for on every single installation, and I'm not sure from the question if they mean the rack itself or the connections to the structure, an engineering review, that may not be something that's required for every design, for every installation. It may be something the jurisdiction is doing for a certain reason, and that would be my question to the jurisdiction. Why are you asking for that? And can you give me the backup or the reason why that's required?
Which basically is in regards to our third recommendation on the screen, that jurisdictions shall clearly inform applicants of all the documentation required in the method of submission, and that I think works into that particular point. A lot of the intent of having all this material and information documented and posted on the jurisdiction's website is to make sure that it's jurisdictions crystal clear of what they're looking for, and that there would be no hidden surprises or gotchas, if you will, for the PV designer and installer.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my approach to that question. If a jurisdiction is requiring for an engineering review of every system on the structural end, that certainly should be stated up front. A, it's a requirement that, and then B, you know, if an applicant or the industry has a question as to why that's a requirement, that's a separate question, one that probably should be brought up and could be discussed. Sometimes, you know, many jurisdictions are vastly understaffed in terms of number of people and maybe even the trained staff they have available. So they do rely more on the stamp of a professional engineer as their plan review because they don't have maybe the time or the capability to make those determinations.
So they provide clarity that there is a jurisdiction that states that if the person requesting the permit is not going to request a racking inspection, in other words, the second inspection is how I would read it, that a structural engineer must physically go to the home and do an inspection and wet stamp a letter verifying that it's structurally safe, and that's not posted on their website. I would encourage jurisdictions to put clearly what the expectations are up front so that people are aware of that. And then as far, again, as whether the jurisdiction believes or you know, I've encountered several jurisdictions that will have particular things that they will focus on, and like you said, Pete, because they've had an experience, or they've had certain experiences that are is a justification for them to request that. And maybe in time, either the quality of the work, maybe that they'll see, or maybe that there's changes to code requirements that might address their concerns. There's a lot of different things that could happen to have a reconsideration. And what and just for a moment, I'm going to jump to invoke one of the item 6 recommendation on the screen, is that there's an incredible value to everyone who is involved, whether they be AHJs or manufacturers or testing labs or installers or designers, to go to local organization meetings that are able to have forums to discuss these situations, and it's not an opportunity to embarrass anybody or but it's an opportunity to share information and to answer questions. And many of us participate on a regular basis. IAEI, the International Association of Electrical Inspectors, there's 4 chapters and 3 divisions in the state of California, and you could go to iaei.org, look under membership, then local contacts, and you'll see, and you can click on the state of California, and you can get the information of who are the organizers, who are the leaders, when they meet, usually a bi-monthly or monthly meetings are what they are. ICC, International Code Council, there's 28 chapters in the state of California, and if you go to iccsafe.org, and on the main bar above, you go to membership, Under membership, go to chapters, and under that, go to chapter info by state, and you can open up for California. You can get, again, specifically where the information is for the chapter closest to you, or just simply if you're just ask somebody. And there'll be a lot of people that will know who what's the local chapter by ICC or what's the local chapter by AI to go to. And as also noted here, SEAC and the invitation you just received at the very beginning of this webinar from our fearless leader Hector to come on by, see what's happening, log in and listen in. And also Center for Sustainable Energy, CSE, has a lot of information, as well as the California Solar Energy Industry Association, CalSEA. CALBO is the California Building Officials. They're an ICC chapter. You could go to calbo.org. They have education weeks that will be coming up in September and October. They also have an annual meeting in the winter time around March or so, February, March. Go to their website, calbo.org, and again, it's by being involved and having those conversations, as Hector so aptly put at the beginning, is that the more we are together and the more we talk with each other, we find that there's a lot of things that we agree on, and it's just maybe we're using a slightly different language and we didn't know it. And it's an opportunity for us to learn from each other and to respect each other's positions, but to learn from each other and come to some point where we can address these different issues.
Yeah, you touched on something.
Sorry, that was my soapbox.
You touched on something extremely important, John, and overall, whether we're talking AB 2188 or just PV in general, or just electrical construction work or permitting in general, and that is seek out the right sources for your information. Especially in the world of PV, there can be a lot of sources out there, but although well-meaning, they may not be accurate to the information you need. And I've been in the electrical business 36 years, and I see a lot of confusion that's caused simply by perhaps the wrong entities or the wrong sources of information. And they're well-meaning, everyone's got the right goals, but they may not have the background or the perspective that's needed for what is being sought. For example, I'm a member of Code Making Panel 8 for the NEC, and so I'll hear a lot of people, that they'll talk about what a particular code requirement means. And I always tell them, if you're not sure, talk to the source. Go to the Code Making Panel member or those organizations that they work to or represent them to find out exactly what something means. Don't ask your next door neighbor or maybe just go search on Google. There's a lot of information out there, but seek out the authors of the information in regard to UL standards. They can come to you. What is the product standard? What does it mean? How is it to be interpreted? Seek out the right sources, and that's absolutely critical.
And we're just on that point, Pete, I'm always available if somebody wants to ask questions about what does the UL standard require, or why is it requiring this, or how is it marked. I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine with and both you and I are fine with that, because you serve on the standard technical panels, and I know there are many others that serve on the UL standard technical panels that are more than happy to answer questions. I think that it's invaluable to be aware of there's other resources too. Is like NFPA publishes the National Electrical Code Handbook, and in the NEC handbook it has the requirements of the code, but then under each section, or under most sections, it will have some explanation, some background information that will help you understand how this got into the code, why, or what is typical solutions that would work for what the code requires.
Yeah, and I see a couple of another question up there regarding the structural elements in single inspection, and I do want to touch on that, as well as go back to the previous question about requiring a structural engineer evaluation, of every installation. On that one, I would certainly refer the person with the question to Toolkit 5 of the guidebook. That's the structural section. It defines some parameters where a jurisdiction could be comfortable of attachment without a structural review. And that section of the code was put together, or I'm sorry, of the guidebook was put together by John Wolf, a structural engineer, and he did a very, very good job of capturing the essential elements for consideration. And the point of that section is to point out when a structural review is most likely unnecessary and not relevant to the installation. So, if I were an applicant and struggling with that, or if I was a jurisdiction and struggling with that, I would certainly use that as a resource. It's an excellent resource for the structural elements. It simplifies, a very complex subject in a meaningful way. And the second question I see up there is in regard to single inspection. And trust me, from our perspective, the single inspection is not, that's the one we struggled with the most, because the questions in relation to how can I effectively look at a structural connection and all the rest I need to do when the elements are covered up. Typically in construction, the way you inspect is before things are covered up. So before those connections are covered by the roofing material and the PV array, isn't that the best time to see those connections? And from an inspection point of view, the answer is yes. But that's not what AB 2188 says. And so we have to comply with the law. I know that much of the intent for that single inspection language was because of multiple agencies being sent out for a relatively simple inspection, where you may have 3 or 4 agencies of local government that had to show up for every inspection. And I know from reading the guidebook that the goal of that was to eliminate that, to get one entity to show up.
But Pete wasn't also,
however, the way it's written, it's a single inspection.
Right, but Pete, wasn't there also some jurisdictions that maybe you had to have the inspection and then you had to wait until that inspection before you could go to the next point in the process, and there are some jurisdictions, like I believe you actually, I think, provide, if somebody requested, that an in-progress inspection, that while they're in the process of doing that, you can come out and look at the certain attachments, right?
That's correct, and some of our applicants that we work with still prefer that method. But that's
it's not like you're going to demand. It's not like you're going to require. I'm going to do a single inspection. It's that you are required to provide a special a single inspection, but you don't have to. If somebody says, could you come out and do some in-progress inspections? There's nothing that says that couldn't be done if that was at the request of the person asking for the permit, right? Yeah, that's correct. And you'd mentioned earlier that some jurisdictions have had experience that means something to them. I can tell you in our case with this jurisdiction, it had some blowback years ago from not doing proper flashing inspections, and because that was our responsibility. And so, and there's legal ramifications for that. So when that happens, jurisdictions understandably want to make sure they're fulfilling their responsibilities. And the vast majority of the PV industry does a good job, wants to do a good job, but there are always players out there that don't, and that's what the process is for. In our case, we have certainly found more than once, installations where there was no flashing, no sealing at all of the penetrations of the roof, and that can also apply to the structural connection as well. So there's a definite need for inspection. You want a level playing field. You want the good guys to be playing to the same levels as those that they only do it because they have to. And honest code compliance.
Code compliance is required. So I do agree with the question. That's a special with the way the language of the law is written. That's a special challenge, and jurisdictions have to cover it the best way they can. In our case, we do ask for some roof tiles to be removed at final inspection if we're doing a single inspection, just so we can verify that the process was was done. At least there's due diligence involved.
And again, I would point to suggest that you go to that first one that we tackled, because obviously single inspection was a huge issue because it was for the various reasons being brought up of how do you verify, and it's also important to note that this is not saying single inspection for every single PV installation, but for those that fit within the box. In other words, what Pete defined earlier, that's defined in the solar permitting guidebook, that when you're fully within those parameters, then there's information there. I think it's that we ought to also, Pete, make sure that we hit just a couple real quick, the other recommendations. One of them, for example, number 2, we use the word consider the use of PV permit application software which automates toolkits. It's not saying that you should, just because it was trying to recognize that it can be difficult for some jurisdictions. Maybe they don't have the ability to, they don't have the funds to be able to purchase such a software, or other contracts. Integration with their other software is yet another layer, but it's something for them to at least consider that might help. I think that, do you have any other thoughts on that recommendation, Pete?
No, but I did want to, I know we're getting towards the end of the class, so I did want to touch on 3 or 4 points that I see regularly here that slow submissions and approvals of designs down. One of the first and most obvious is make sure your submittal is complete and accurate. Obviously, I know that's always the intent, but is the site plan there? Is the single line or 3 line there? Do we have cut sheets, manufacturer spec sheets for all the critical components? Is there a detail for the attachment, the flashing, and the sealing of the roof? Are the fire setbacks indicated? A second major bullet point is make sure you're submitting a permit with the knowledge and agreement of the owner of the property. Like I said, we get multiple permits that the owners didn't know about, and that causes a lot of headaches and slowdowns, and is not correct. A contractor can only submit the permit with the knowledge of the homeowner, so make sure that's being done. And I think one thing we should touch on, John, because you and I have dealt with this a lot most recently, and this really slows things down on my end currently, and that's what's required, what are the responsibilities for the PV mounting system, the racking. Can we use the rack to bond and ground the modules? Do we have the required fire resistance? Those are huge elements, and to know the answers to those questions, we need to know what racking system is being installed, what modules are being installed. Do you have the installation instructions or cut sheets or listing information available?
Which, by the way, is what we're going to be doing the rest of this week, aren't we? We're working on providing and developing an informational bulletin on UL 2703 that SEAC will, once there is an agreement within the group, that will be posted on the website, and a subsequent, I'm sure, webinar will be on that, as well as it's also important to address what should be in the markings and what should be in the instructions, and to develop that into, to feed that back into the standard, so then that all of the manufacturers will have a minimum basis of what they will provide. And that's all based on input from as we go along, as we learn, and we learn what is important, what we need to address, and we also learn things that we don't need that information, but we definitely need this piece over here. And I think it's interesting that, again, be involved. Be involved. Go to the chapters. Go to education. There's a significant amount of training across the state. Not just CSE, but also IAEI and Calvo have done a considerable amount. And the more you have those conversations, the more you're gonna be able to understand. And I agree with you, Pete, that of talking with the people that are the ones that, and not just something you happen to pick up here or there, but from those people that actually are involved and are the ones that are participating in developing the requirements and documents.
So that means I'm asking the right person when I ask you this question. Can a rack system be used to ground or bond all the modules that are connected to it? Is that an automatic okay or an automatic given?
You know the answer to that, and the answer is no. It's not an automatic given. What you have to do is, first of all, see is that grounding, is that rack system evaluated for the grounding and bonding, and that will be indicated in the certification information posted on any of the third-party certification organizations' websites. And two is it's not for every single panel that's used on that rack. It's only for specific PV modules that have been evaluated for on that rack. And so therefore you have to look to see what panels are matched with that rack to accomplish grounding and bonding. And the same holds true, as you well know, for fire classification as well as for mechanical loading. However, of course, there is a lot more, it still is requiring that you identify specific modules, but fortunately it's grouped for the fire classification. But that would be a whole nother webinar to discuss on how exactly that is done. Suffice it to say, look at the certification, see what panels, specific panels are to be with that specific rack system to accomplish whether it's grounding and bonding or fire classification or mechanical loading.
And fire classification of that array is a building code requirement, is it not?
Correct. It is covered in Chapter 15 of the Building Code.
Yeah. So yeah, as you said, that's a whole nother subject and probably a subject for another webinar, but an extremely important one. And more that's becoming, a focus of code requirements for the installers and especially the jurisdiction. So it's absolutely essential that they have correct understanding of these elements and get that information from the right people.
So Pete, there's one other question here that I think that we would want to address. The one about that a certain company keeps on pulling solar permits for homeowners that haven't even signed a contract. How can this continue to be allowed?
Well, and go to the jurisdiction. I can tell you this, that we don't necessarily ask for an affidavit from the homeowner, from every homeowner for every permit that's pulled by a contractor. And I can say that has never really been a need in the past. However, it is something we are noticing with the PV industry at the moment. So if that's being noticed, as the building director, I would want to call in that contractor and question them on it. From preliminary checks I've done on my end, there's an element of fraud when that's done, if it's done without the homeowner's consent. But of course, that's fraud to the homeowner, so the homeowner has to be the one to drive that approach. But having said that, if we notice that occurring to a large degree with a certain entity, I would encourage the jurisdiction to call that entity in and talk to them about it and take it to whatever level they need to. There's certainly attorneys that could advise them on the legalities and the approach that should be taken with that situation.
Well, John and Pete, thank you so much for all your advice, all your recommendations and suggestions, and how to improve everything that we do with solar PV. And thank all the folks that joined us this morning. And if you found this webinar valuable, I encourage you to let others know. There's a wealth of information on the SEAC website, and there's all the meetings, previous meeting recordings are there if you want to listen to them, and previous webinars also. And we're going to continue to have these webinars probably every month as we publish SEAC published documents. And the key thing I think you probably heard over and over, it really comes down to communication. And sometimes AHJ It's the other side of the counter from installer, a contractor, or an owner, but it's just, you know, extending your hand across that counter and kind of listening to each other and hearing each other's pain points and how to resolve them, you know, to make things simpler. And I cannot stress, you know, having the information on the website. That's, you know, so people know upfront, you know, what it's going to take, even what it's going to take for a single inspection. So there's clarity on both sides. So there's no surprises on both sides of the table. And that just helps us out, helps all of us out. And again, thank you all. I think let me see, there might be another question here. Maybe we can just tackle that one and then we go on. And again, thank you all. Maybe John and Pete, maybe take a look at that last one question. We can.
Yeah, I was noticing that. I'm sorry we missed that earlier. It's always the fun with a free-form discussion that sometimes you might miss these. And that's regarding if the customer owns his condo and the association says they own the roof, can he get solar since it will need to be mounted on the roof? And Pete, I would believe that would be, it has to be an issue about what's covered by the homeowner association rules, would it not?
Somewhat, and I'd have to, you know the specifics of the situation, but keep in mind there's something called the Solar Rights Act that was established many years ago in California, and it does limit the type of limitations that homeowners association can put on dwellings for the purpose of PV installation. So there are limits, but those limits are limited. I would encourage the questioner to go to the Center for Sustainable Energy, go to their website, and they've got the information there and the actual language of the Solar Rights Act. I think it's from 1978, and it's been updated, but that's how long it's been in effect that would define those parameters.
And that website is energycenter.org.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you again, and for the attendees, if you have any further questions, especially very important issues that an installer, ASJ, manufacturer, anybody involved in this industry that you think SEAC should take a look at and debate and come up with some recommendations, we'll be glad to take a look at that. We have a long list of items to tackle, which is fantastic. This industry continues to grow, and the demand for solar is just tremendous. So while all of us working together, we can make things easier on each other. And with that, I thank you all. Thank you, John and Pete, and all of you have a great day.
Thank you, Hector.
Thank you.